GM.
Hey guys.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hey Ariel.
Great to have you join us.
I'm very excited. Thank you for having me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Jeff will be a little bit behind us, but we'll get started without him, and then hopefully he'll join soon. All right, Vaughn, Matt, you guys ready to get started? Ariel?
I'm ready.
Let's do it.
Perfect. All right,
Ready.
well, thanks guys for joining us. It's our second, I guess, episode. Are we calling that at this point? Today we're going to have Ariel Hudes on from Pace Verso and Jeff Davis from Art Blocks, who's going to join in about 15 to 20 minutes, hopefully. And we're talking about this topic of conceptual artists and creative coders, and sort of the ongoing trend of relationships between two different artists from, maybe I should say, two different backgrounds or skill sets coming together to create generative collections. I guess, Ariel, I mean, you're sort of front and center on this topic. I know you have a lot to say, so I'll shoot it right over to you. What's been, I guess before I even go into questions, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're working on at Pace Verso, what you've been working on, what's the plans for the future, and any general answers you have to this topic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, why don't I just take everybody back and talk a little bit about Pace and Pace Verso, big picture, and then I can talk about generative art and pairing our artists with creative coders. So first of all, hello, I'm Ariel Hudes. As Alex said, I am the head of Pace Verso, and I founded Pace Verso within Pace about 2 years ago. Pace, for anybody who doesn't know, is a global art gallery. We've been around for 60 years, which in the art world is a really long time to be around. Most galleries have pretty short lives. We're based in 9 cities around the globe. I'm here in our New York headquarters. We represent artists from basically the last 100 years, like Jeff Koons, Alexander Rothko, Mark Rothko and Alexander Calder, and many more. We represent about 100 artists. And about 2 years ago, our artists within that 100, started coming to us and saying they were interested in doing NFT projects. And what did we think? And could we help produce and support their projects? And Pace's CEO and owner, who I work with very closely, came to me and said, Ariel, the way Pace has been successful for 60 years is that when these amazing artists come to us and say there's something they want to do, we figure out how to support them. So let's figure out how to support them in doing this. And so Pace Verso was born. And what Pace Verso does is we produce custom, unique projects. So far to date, only by Pace artists, although we are expanding beyond that in the next month or so with an exhibition of paintings by Tyler Hobbs, our first non-Pace artist, being produced by Pace Verso. And so a lot of times what this looks like is an artist who's a painter or a sculptor or a performance artist comes to me with an idea for a project they want to do that leverages blockchain technology and often generative art technology. They lay out the concept for the project and they say, can you help me produce it? And then my job and our job at Pace Verso is to pair them up with someone or someones who have the technical skills to execute that project. And then the role Pace plays, in addition to matchmaker on that front, is that we bring the project to market, either ourselves or through a partner. Like we have an ongoing partnership with Art Blocks where we release projects by our artists. And yeah, that's what we've done. So we've done that for many Pace artists so far, including, just this past fall, we worked with, I think, 2 notable artists, Loie Hollowell, who's a well-known painter, and Tara Donovan, who's a sculptor, who both did projects through our partnership with Art Blocks that were really incredible generative art projects where they worked hand in hand with a creative coder to bring those projects to life. And that's the background, but yes, I have a lot to say on what that process looked like and the historic precedent for working that way. But that was a lot of me talking, so I'll pause there.
No, that was great. Thanks for that intro. Sort of building on that, what what is the collaborative process like? I mean, I talked a little bit about this with you when I saw you in New York a few weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about Loie, for example, and the work with contractions and how she sort of started with like these physical works and this generative project being sort of a further exploration of that in terms of like color and possibly some other things. Maybe you can just very briefly talk about that and how similar that process is for some of the other pace artists that you're using a creative coder to collaborate with and either expand on or create entirely new work.
Yeah, totally. So every project is completely unique. And I always say it's similar to exhibitions at Pace Gallery. If you come to any of our spaces around the globe and you walk in this month and see one exhibition and next month and see a different exhibition, you almost won't recognize the space because we will build new walls, we'll paint the walls different colors, we'll do all sorts of things in the space to customize it for that artist's work. And I always say each Pace Verso project is as custom as each Pace Gallery exhibition. So there's really no template that we're following. That said, in the case of the Loie Hollowell project, so why don't I talk about that one? So Loie is an amazing painter we work with. She's really a market darling, we would say. She has just done incredibly well on the market in the last few years. You have to wait in line behind, unfortunately, dozens and dozens of rabid Loie Hollowell fans to purchase one of her paintings from us. And often people take them, they buy them through us on the primary market. And unfortunately, you know, for us and for the artist, they'll turn around and take them right to auction where the price will go up sort of overnight, like 3, 4, 5x into, you know, even like close to $1 million. So that's Loie, and she makes beautiful, beautiful paintings. You can see why they're beloved if you spend any time with them. So Loie came to us and said she paints this particular form. What it looks like is 2 circles stacked on top of each other that are splitting open down the middle at different angles. And what that's actually based on is it's based on her experience of giving birth. And she thinks of the top circle as sort of her head and the bottom circle as her belly, and the opening and dilation that happens in the birth process. That's the angle you see. So there's like 10 different angles because you go from 0 to 10 centimeters, or 11, I guess. So Loie said, I want to keep playing with those forms, those 10 or 11 different forms that are similar. I'd like to use generative tools to crack open the color combinations I can explore within those forms. Because she said, in the studio, it takes days, weeks, months to make one painting and see what one color combination looks like. But she saw the potential for generative technology to allow her to explore a lot more, a lot faster. So we paired her with a creative coder, and what that process looks like, it's been so cool to see it from the inside. Loie is in the driver's seat. She is the director. She has the concept and the vision. The creative coder is the executor, hitting the keystrokes, but not a collaborator per se, really just hitting the keystrokes. So Loie is saying, soften this and sharpen that, more of this color and less of that. I want a higher percent of the outputs to have this angle and a lower percent to have that angle. And this person is executing on that over weeks and months. It takes a while, and they work truly shoulder to shoulder. And I have more, I can go into like other analogs for how that works, but that's like in the broader art world, but that's how it generally works with a pace artist working with a creative coder. The pace artist is the driver, the creative coder is the executor.
I think you're touching on something that might be useful for the rest of the audience to know, because I'm sure many probably don't. It's like, historically speaking, in art, this isn't like anything new for an artist to come up with an idea and maybe have like a team work with them to execute that idea. And I guess there's kind of some debate going on over whether that should devalue the art in some degree because the artist themselves isn't executing the whole process. I kind of go back and forth on it. I think it depends on the situation, but I'm just kind of curious to hear, maybe you could kind of help fill us in with some more historical context as it relates to this practice, and then we could kind of get into a discussion of, you know, how that kind of
totally. Yeah, I have a bunch of things to say. I think the most expedient way to explain the analog for this in the traditional art world is, think of whatever the last giant bronze or metal sculpture you saw. I see Andrew Batter on the Twitter space, and like he and I know both live in Brooklyn near the gorgeous Ursula von Ruydingsvard bronze sculpture that's outside of the Barclays Center. It's like a monumental multi-ton bronze sculpture by this amazing sculptor, Ursula von Ruydingsvard. No one goes up to that sculpture and says, well, wait a minute. Did Ursula pour the bronze herself? Did she build the 20-foot tall mold? Did she build the foundry that holds the mold? No one says that. Ursula is de facto fully 100% the artist accepted by everyone, but she worked with a team that were experts in fabricating in this particular way to bring that work to life. And this, I would say, is exactly the same as that. This is an artist. In the case we were just talking about, Loie Hollowell is the artist, working with a fabricator, a vendor, to execute on their vision using that fabricator or vendor's, expert vernacular. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely way more technically involved. Like it's that requires dangerous tools and stuff. Like it becomes there's a lot of sense. So like someone like Damien Hirst, most people probably don't know all those interviews, such physical just all done by for all of them interns.
You're cutting out quite a bit, I believe.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I can't really hear your question.
Yeah,
Can you guys hear me all right now?
it's a little bit better.
All right.
Much better.
Sorry. I don't know what's going on. This is just Twitter Spaces being Twitter Spaces. But I guess, like, is there a line that exists? Because, like, some people were kind of upset when they found out that Damien Hirst didn't actually paint any of the dots that he's done, like, for his NFT project. So, like, is that, like, how do you kind of view that as compared to, like, a sculpture, which is obviously way more technically involved than putting a bunch of dots on a piece of paper?
Yeah, so right, the example I gave with a bronze foundry is right, technically complex, it's a sculpture, but painting is actually the area that maybe has like the longest history of assistants and fabricators being used to execute. So if you go back hundreds of years to the Renaissance, go back to the 1500s in Italy, when many of the old master paintings that we all revere today were painted. Very few of them completely were painted by the painter we attribute them to. So, for example, hopefully everybody is familiar with the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's magnum opus. 100 assistants painted that with, for however you want to say it, Michelangelo. Michelangelo, we attribute the work to because it was his vision. That is sort of like the mastermind. He was the mastermind behind it. There's the images that we see in our, when we think of it, like that's Michelangelo coming up with this idea of God's finger reaching out and touching, and the execution and the actual like craft work of putting paint on, in that case, plaster. That's not really what the value in that work, or I would say in Damien Hirst's work, is coming from. It's not about, in these cases, like the specific artist's hand being present. That's not where the value comes from. We often in the art world sort of break things into craft and then fine art or visual art. And craft is what it sounds like, things that are difficult to make and where you do see the artist's hand. And oftentimes the value of work that's described as craft kind of tops out at, like how beautiful is the object and how well constructed it is. Whereas fine art that often has an artist's name on it and many assistants, fabricators, vendors behind it has potential for much higher value because the value is coming from the artist who is behind the work, not the actual like craft of making it, if that makes sense.
Ariel, just want to say thank you for coming on. Appreciate having you join us today. Obviously, it's a good topic to talk about. I mean, I think a lot of what we're talking about is a fundamental question of, who is the artist for anything? And, I support all the PACE projects. I bought them all. I enjoy them greatly. I think some of it goes back to like the early days of Gen Art before there was a lot more attention being put on it and a lot more people coming into the space. If you couldn't code, you couldn't do Gen Art. So on some level, obviously the earliest artists in the space all had to be coders. The benefit is there's obviously a much bigger audience for a much bigger artist audience out there uh, to pull from, and then that don't know how to code. So the benefit is probably overall better art. But I think the thing that really comes down to is I don't think the market is going to necessarily care who codes it or who doesn't code it. And I do think that the art is kind of the idea more than who codes it. But I think from a marketing standpoint, from a selling standpoint, I don't think the market will differentiate. Similar to how like in the music market, no one really cares whether someone wrote the song who's performing it. It's all about who performs the song. Although from a purist standpoint, someone from an artistic standpoint, you might say the person that does their own coding or writes their own song may have stronger uh, technical skills or credit in the marketplace because they are doing the whole thing from soup to nuts. But I don't think the market will differentiate all that much, if at all, between having creative coders as long as the art concept is good. And in the short term, we'll probably get better art because we're pulling from a bigger audience that has that a lot of the artists don't have the ability to code themselves. So
Yeah.
um, so yeah,
Yep.
I think the project that is good. I like the stuff that we've seen so far, and I know we have a drop. You have a drop coming up tomorrow, I believe. So
Yes, we do.
looking forward to that also.
You are totally taking the words right out of my mouth, and many things I say all the time. I really do think if the generative art world at large was to make some decision that it's only generative art if it's coded by the artist, you're just turning off the tap for so many amazing artists who are out there, who have ideas for how to leverage generative tools in really creative, smart, boundary pushing ways, but don't have the ability to do the coding themselves. I mean, think about, I'll go back to my parallel on bronzes or yours on music. If we put the same constraint on bronze artists or musicians, think of all the great art and music that would be lost. So I agree, more artists to come in. I also agree that the market won't care. And I think the Pace Verso Art Blocks projects have been a great indicator of that. They've been really strong performers. And even though everybody is, I constantly hear people asking the types of questions we're asking today, it hasn't really borne out in hurting the markets, which I think is great and shows that the community is like willing to expand. And then your last point that I totally agree with is this, you made the point about purists. And I do think in generative art, there will always be a contingent of deep purists, and there should be, who really are paying close attention and care about who did the coding and how they coded it and what language. And, it'll go way beyond just the question of if the artist did the coding, but all these other things that relate to sort of a pure take on generative art. And they'll collect probably in a different way than the majority of people in the market will. And that's what makes a healthy ecosystem, I think, is people collecting in different ways. So I think that's great, but to your point, I don't think that will be like the mass market.
Right, but I think that like people like myself or the people that are like really hardcore into it, I do think we'll always put the people that are doing the whole process from soup to nuts on a slightly higher level. But again, from a market standpoint, from a selling standpoint, I don't think the market will really differentiate all that much. But for the people that are the hardcore, hardest core, ultra nerd, love every aspect of it, I do think the people that are doing the entire process from soup to nuts will be held to a higher will be slightly higher regard, only because not everyone can do the whole process. But I don't think the market will differentiate ultimately.
Yep, I think that's possible and even likely. And right now, we just can't quite observe that because the vast majority of projects that are coming out right now are by artists who are also coders. And as that balance shifts over time, and I mean, just in terms of numbers, it's more likely to reverse, and more projects will be coming out that are artists who are not coders. We'll see, we'll see how the market persists, and how, like, what premium is put on the individuals who can do it all.
What happens in this situation, like where we're pairing these conceptual artists with the coders? Does it matter necessarily if the work is existing already in the physical space in some variety, and this is just a further exploration? Does it need to be new work? And if the answer is yes to the former, how do we think about things like dilution, right? I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, Ariel, I think, in regards to almost treating it like it's maybe like addition work or some like ancillary thing relative to the physical work that's already being sold and distributed. How do you sort of think about that? What planning goes into those decisions, and inevitably, how does that affect the market for the artists?
Whew, yeah, good questions. Okay, so does it sort of, what's the relationship between the physical and the digital? I mean, I'll come at this from a couple angles. One is the way we here at Pace approach art projects is that it's executing on the artist's vision only. We're not, when the artist comes to us with a concept, we're not saying like, oh, we don't think that will do so well in the market, or oh, this might have such and such impact on the market, or even like, we need you to market it this way or that way. We're saying it's our job to be here and stand behind the art, stand behind your vision, and get it over the finish line out into the world. And really, like, that can feel very risky. It's definitely not the way I think most NFT producers approach NFT production. I think a lot of them bring marketing into the dialogue, but Pace has this, and other galleries too. We have this great track record of 60 years of that working, of learning that if you trust the artist, everything else kind of follows. So to go back to your question, Alex, if Loey came to us with a project that was inherently tied to a set of physical works she had done, she had a new idea for a generative project. All we had to say was, great, let's make it happen. Tara Donovan, by contrast, came up with this idea, actually, that also tied to a physical. I don't know if people know this, but Tara's Quarty project for Art Block's Pace Verso was based on a tiny, cute little book that she had produced, where she essentially executed Quarty by hand using a typewriter to type out all the letters and symbols in various densities and sizes, like you see in the generative project. So that was actually not so dissimilar from Loey's, where she said, I've done this thing in the physical world. I want to see how generative tools allow me to crack it open. So, as I think through this, I realize, Alex, I think that's something more and more physical artists will do as they cross over. They'll say, there's already this motif or this symbol or composition that I'm obsessed with in the physical world, and I want to use these tools to explore it more broadly. And what will that do to someone's market? We just have to cross that bridge as we come to it, supporting their work first and foremost, and kind of making smart choices about price and quantity, but knowing that if the artist is getting their work out into the world, the rest will kind of work itself out.
I'm curious, since we're talking a lot about physical artists kind of translating their work into a digital medium by using generative code, do you see a scenario where we start seeing the reverse happen, where we see these digitally native artists exploring, maybe a co-creator to help them, bring their work into the physical world? And so, Pace clients be receptive to need to become more established first for that to happen? Just curious to kind of get your history.
Definitely. Sorry, you're cutting off. Sorry to interrupt you. But I think I heard your question. So no, definitely. I mean, we have a perfect upcoming example of that, which is that the exhibition we're doing opening on March 30th. Everyone come say hi. Of Tyler Hobbs's QQLs. I mean, Tyler has always done physical things, but I think everyone knows him as a digital artist and coder. And he's taking QQLs. He's minting 12 of the QQLs himself, and then he's painting them. And he's painting them working with a fabricator who specializes in plotter paintings using generative code. So it's, to your point, it's actually the exact reverse of what we usually do. He is crossing in, it's with Art Matter, yep. So he's crossing into the physical space using somebody, again, who has an expertise in something that actually Tyler's pretty good at him on his own, but doesn't have like quite the setup and deep expertise these guys at Art Matter have. So we're definitely seeing that. And I think, is that what's going to draw in PACE clients? I mean, PACE clients are drawn in. They're paying attention to generative art. They're showing up to Dutch auctions. They're definitely showing up in the secondary market. I don't think PACE clients are ever going to be the majority of buyers in something like a Dutch auction when we have like 500 outputs, because if you think about how many people PACE sells to in a year, we're selling a low number of artworks at usually a very high price point. So we don't have like 500 people to show up to a Dutch auction. We're always going to be bringing a smaller but like deeply committed group of people, and that's happening already. More physical outputs, I think, will definitely help. I think Tyler's exhibition with us will be a watershed moment where we're going to try to place those paintings with museums and top collectors whose collections include paintings that Tyler should be in conversation with. And those are the moments where like a lot of energy and a lot of new eyes will follow. That's our hope for that exhibition.
I had a question for you. Do you think that creative coders will ultimately be able to use the work that they coded as part of their portfolio when they go on to maybe start trying to code their own projects, or is that a risk? Or again, like it's gonna kind of comes down to who is the artist. I agree that the vision is really more the art, but then how it's executed is a pretty big part of that too. So I'm just kind of wondering if you have any thoughts about are there multiple creative coders that you guys are working with, and then if some of them are better than others, then that person might. I'm just kind of curious as to how you feel about that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I go to the analog of like, okay, I think of this one foundry I've worked with in upstate New York that does a lot of bronze pouring. If one of their expert bronze pourers wanted to do his own work, would he use Ursula von Rijdingsvaard's work as part of his portfolio? I think if a portfolio is like an overall summary of everything someone has done and contributed to, absolutely. But I think there will be and needs to be, and even the creative coders would want a distinction that makes it clear it's not their artwork or what role they've played, and it's not as the conceptualist behind it.
No, but just saying that they coded it, meaning if I'm the person that coded QWERTY or contractions, like it does mean something. It's probably a little more than the person who poured the bronze. I don't really know how the whole process of making a bronze works. But
I don't think it's that different, but
okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I will defer to you on that because I truly have no idea on bronze. But I know that the person who's coding the work is, I don't want to say an artist also, but there is a lot of, the final product will reflect on how well of a coder that person is. And so, I would say if someone, if you're reviewing a project to do, and someone says, well, here's my first piece of art, but by the way, I coded these 6 projects and, they're all pretty good projects. I think that it would lend some credibility to them as well. So I'm just wondering like how.
So I see what you're saying. So I think there's the distinction that we should make is between the quality of the execution versus the quality of the art, like the capital A art. So if we had at PACE if we were considering working with a new young painter and adding them to our roster, and let's say they paint, I don't know, abstract landscapes of, let's say we're working with a lot of new African artists right now. So where they're from in Ghana. And they previously worked in an artist studio where they painted these like incredibly intricate portraits that were required like unbelievably high execution abilities as a painter, like really detailed and vibrant. It would be like nice to know they have painting chops, but it ultimately wouldn't make really any difference in the in our belief in their potential as an artist who has to deliver the ideas that are become the works of art. Because really we know like the execution is almost always has some interchangeability to it, whereas the driving of the idea is completely not interchangeable. It's totally non-fungible.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to people like looking at like kind of more simplistic masterpieces like Rothko and being like, oh, I could paint that. It's just a couple squares on a color, but that's not what gives value. It's kind of the same concept, right?
Exactly. Or look at Jeff Koons, who hopefully people know, who I think is like the most famous living artist today and has some of the highest auction record prices of any living artist. And he's known for his shiny balloon dogs. I mean, I would think everybody knows, looking at one of these giant shiny metal balloon dogs, that like Jeff didn't have a thing to do with the execution of that object. What makes it valuable is the idea and the directing of the execution of that idea.
Ariel, how do you guys select creative coders? Is it just, I mean, I know like obviously some of the collaborative collections with art blocks, maybe you're relying on artists on, you know, that have done drops on their site before, on their platform rather, themselves. Do you currently have in-house creative coders? Is that something you plan to do in the future, or will you add creative coders in the same method in which you roster artists? What's the thesis there?
Okay, we are looking for creative coders. So if there are any out there, please seriously DM me or email me or something. We're looking, and you'll have, you know, anybody who comes through the pipeline, we would evaluate the same way we would evaluate any like vendor or fabricator. So we'd want to see previous work you've done for other artists and what that looks like. We don't currently have any in-house, Alex. I would love that, just because it would make it more, you know, we'd be able to work more quickly and pair our artists up with great matches more quickly. We don't. We may, like, that's on the table that we could add a creative coder, but going back to my point about how every PACE project is totally custom end to end, there is something nice about being able to pair each artist with the team that best suits their work. So we do, like, right now I have generative art projects in the works with our artists with probably like 4 different creative coders, and each one like really well fits that artist. So it's hard for me to go put that all together and do all the deals and find all the people, but it's probably better for the artist than saying like, okay, here's our one in-house person, you have to work with them.
Great. Hey, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Hello. I just got off a meeting. Glad to be here.
Hello, Jeff.
Perfect timing.
Good to have you.
I actually had a question for Jeff, if you're ready to take one right off the bat here.
Sure.
So I think I've heard, or it's been passed to me through some others, about your thoughts about the use of color, most specifically in relation to color studies, and how, I don't know if there was some concern from your side, or that you didn't think that they would necessarily translate to print well. Can you talk a little bit about that? And if you think, like, what do you think about going the other direction? You know, like some of the physical works, like translating to digital with color.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I think the color study, I've had like lots of requests, like, you know, do you do prints, and how do I print this? And I do generally respond in those situations that it was intended to be a digital project. And so the color space that is achievable on a display or through light is wider than what you can achieve through print. And so there are colors in color study that just aren't reproducible properly. And so I don't mind if people want to print them, but that's why I don't necessarily have like a print version, kind of print offering, I guess, for that project, because it's really meant to be digital. Well, a lot of my NFT work is been kind of produced to be just kind of digital only. But that doesn't mean you can't, so you can constrain a color range digitally to fit within what's reproducible in print. And so I think what you're getting as kind of in the converse, if say you are a painter by trade and your artwork works within a certain color space that you can achieve in paint, you can replicate that digitally. You can confine the digital color space to like only utilize colors within that range. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, you can do more in color digitally than you can physically. And so it's just a matter of like calibrating those things based on, what you're trying to achieve, with the project.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Ariel.
I'm going to take that as yes. I think, Jeff, what you're saying is something I've heard from a lot of the PACE artists who are physical artists switching over to work in the generative space, is that they want to use, in some cases, other tools that are only available digitally, but the appeal is precisely that they can do things in this space that they couldn't do physically. And that's been very cool to watch artists like, I keep thinking of Loey and Tara, but also, we have our drop tomorrow with Robert Whitman. That's another great example of an artist who that come out in his generative project, but never been able to execute them fully until he's working now in a generative digital space.
We didn't really get a chance to ask Jeff this yet, but I think he's the only like actual generative artist on the stage at the moment. Vaughn sort of was asking Ariel, talking about this idea of, I guess, like purity around generative artists and what constitutes generative art. So as a generative artist yourself, how do you feel about the sort of dichotomy between generative artists being both the conceptual artist and the coder as it in relation to, sort of what we've seen with conceptual artists collaborating with a coder?
Yeah, I just think there's room for all of it, to be honest. And I think it can just be up to the audience of these projects to kind of decide what they find valuable, what they find interesting. And so I'm assuming a lot of the beginning part of this talk, I'm sorry for being late, like I'm assuming you chatted over like how artist studios have operated historically. I'm assuming Ariel got into that space, but you think of artists like, I don't know, Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst, or even a little further back than that, Andy Warhol, where there are large teams of people working on these projects that are coming out of these studios, and it's all orchestrated by the artist at the top, the thing. But at the same time, there are sculptors and painters that do all of everything from start to finish, and it's not you can't in a general way say this is better or more valuable than that. It really just depends on what the end result is of either the individual or the team, collaborative team that produced the thing, with some hierarchy involved in there. So I think the same thing applies to the generative space. I think, it's great to have, practitioners of generative art that can do everything from front to back. But I also think it's very interesting for other viewpoints, people with different backgrounds coming in to understand this as a tool, as an art making tool, and finding different ways to explore it as well. So I'm for all of it. I think it all has value. So, and then it's up to, is the end result of the project and the artwork compelling? And if the answer is yes, then that was a great approach to take.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, obviously I'm a big fan of you and have a lot of your work, and really respect everything you've done in the space. So it's nice to have you here, joining us today to be part of this discussion. So I guess the question is like, again, I want to hear your view. You kind of talked about it just now a little bit, but do you think that, like, from your perspective and from like the people that we know that have been collecting gen art, for a while, do you think that the market will differentiate though at some point, or do you think that the quality of art that's going to come in will vastly exceed any short-term concerns about that? I mean, like I said, I mean, I'm kind of, as a purist, I feel like I like it when an artist in the space is also doing the coding as well, but I don't think that the market's going to really differentiate. But I'm just curious if you could maybe talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think it's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to know like what the market wants and doesn't want, as a creative, as an artist. So that's a tricky one. I think for me, that, like, I don't know, how do I want to put this? I think there's interesting outcomes in both scenarios. Maybe this is how I can be be diplomatic about it. So I think kind of wholly owning the project from start to finish, like a generative artist, this is what someone does by trade, and they only work with code and they execute, an entire project. There is, I think, you get accustomed to thinking in a certain way in terms of like algorithms and algorithmic space and variability, and that comes naturally when you are kind of undertaking the whole process yourself. But I think it's also really, really interesting with someone that's coming in with a different mindset about the creation of art. It has conceptual underpinnings, or it has, it's related to a canon of art history, or there's just other kind of knowledge and learnings that are being brought to the table. And so finding, technical support on creating a generative project around those sorts of things, I think that's really, really interesting too. And so it takes concepts that maybe weren't achievable through other traditional means and explores new territory that way. So to me, it's all very new kind of ish and exciting. And I just think we're just like right at, the edge of a frontier. And I think there's just plenty of room to explore. I just don't think there's this sort of like finite space or a linear direction. Maybe that's even a better way to think about it. There's not just like one vector forward, and it's just this thing progressively getting more complex or more compelling. I think there's just a lot of directionality, and that just there's a lot of room to explore in a lot of different directions. So I don't know. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's good. Thank you. I mean, I guess like just listening to both of you say what you're saying, and I mean, I obviously was thinking about it, knowing this was coming up. It's kind of like we've talked about how artists embrace new tools, and in generative art, we're using the computer as our paintbrush. So maybe an analogy for this would be, well, using a creative coder, the creative coder is the paint, the computer is the paintbrush, but the artist is still directing both of them, and maybe that's the way to look at it.
And here's sort of an interesting, I think, counterpoint to some of this. So we talked about, we were asking about prints, making prints of your work. So when I make prints of my work, I don't do that work. I hire someone who has a big printer and is an expert in color calibration and, maintaining that printer and doing that work. Are my prints less valuable because someone else actually produce them for me based on my specifications? And I would say no, but it's a similar thing. So if you think of like generative artists who are used to working digitally, creating physical representations of their work, unless they're hand painting them themselves, the same thing happens, but kind of in the reverse as well. We do rely on experts in certain industries, in certain areas, people with certain skill sets to help us achieve the things that we want to do artistically. When you're a painter, you likely get to a point where you're no longer stretching your own canvases. You usually have somebody do that work for you. You hire someone or you buy them off the store shelf. So, I think, this happens in a lot of, and I think it's degrees, there's degrees of collaboration and degrees of involvement. But I think it happens in a lot of different facets of art creation, where you get assistance.
Yeah, Jeff, first of all, we came to the same conclusion as you just before you joined. We were talking about Tyler Hobbs's paintings, actually, the ones he's making for Pace, and how it is sort of the same process in reverse. But I was going to ask you, and guys, I hope you don't mind, I'm jumping in with a question for Jeff. I was going to ask you, because you've also been a printer in the past, and you're a master printer. When an artist came to you to print their work, did you feel like you printing it made it any less theirs?
I mean, no, not at all. Yeah, I felt like I was working to facilitate their vision, as an artist. So yeah, Ariel's referring to my work at Davis Editions, which was a contemporary print publishing company I had founded prior to starting to work with art blocks. And so, yeah, that was my job, was to work directly with artists to help them create digital prints of their work, based on their specifications. But yeah, there was definitely a translation there that had to happen to go from, if they were a painter or whatever medium they were working in, to help create, print editions of their stuff. So yeah, no, I didn't, I just felt like I was helping them, achieve their goals artistically.
Ariel, we've talked a little bit about collectors that have been around a while that aren't sort of collectors as of the new NFT wave, and their starting point is necessarily generative art. Do you think that the way to onboard them or get them interested, if they aren't already in generative art, is through physical mediums, or are they perfectly fine with going straight to the digital? What have your conversations been with them? What are your specific thoughts?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think there's an element of the physical that helps, but when I say physical, I don't mean a print or a painting from the NFT. I just mean making it easy for someone to buy a screen that they can show their digital work on, just so they can live with it in their home. I think for a traditional art collector, that is important. People want to live with their art off of their phones, off of their computer screens. So one way we're trying to work on this, actually, Jeff, I don't think I've shared this with you yet, and I'm pretty excited, is we've started sourcing custom screens that we can offer to our clients that are square, that are relatively inexpensive, that are really beautiful. Jeff, they're the ones we used at Frieze London to show the Corti project on. So we can now just really easily offer these beautiful screens to our clients and say, buy this NFT that you love because we taught you about generative art, and you've followed this artist for years, and you can live with it in your home. And I think that is a real selling point for a traditional collector who's ready to dip a toe in, but a little nervous.
Yeah, and I find just general public, when I talk to people about what I do, and as a artists creating NFTs or working at art blocks, and I just always get that question. Okay, so I buy this NFT, now what? That's always the next question. And so I think there is an appeal to figuring out a way. I think Ariel put it well. How do you live with this art? And if that's a print or finding a digital solution to display the work, I think that's fertile ground. I think there's a lot of room there for, I think the the digital nature of the artwork has gone out in front of the physical display of it. So I think there's some catching up that's needs to be done, that's being done. But I also I do think there is sort of a I try to explain that there's like a new way of thinking about collecting that is maybe different from collectors of physical art that's taking place in the kind of NFT space. And I liken it to the fact that, you know, when I'm old, so this analogy makes sense, but hopefully it translates. But when digital cameras first came out, everybody would, you know, you'd take your photos of whatever your vacation or your family or whatever, and then you would take the memory card right away to like Walgreens or something, and you would print the entire set of all the photos that you just took, and you'd bring them home. And that just kind of we were kind of stuck on this idea that you developed photographs and you created physical things of them, but people don't do that anymore, and it's because they've grown comfortable with photos being, you know, digital assets that live on their phone, and that's how they share them with people, and that's how they hold on to them, and they don't feel the need necessarily to print every single photo out that they've taken. And so I think that's I try to use that as a comparison to people that don't understand like what's happening, that there are people now that are comfortable owning NFTs as digital assets and having that be the primary form that they possess them and share them and kind of live with them. And I think that's okay too. And so I do think there's a little bit of a mental shift that, you know, I try to explain, you know, that it's actually okay that if people buy NFTs and they just hold them in a digital wallet and they're comfortable.
Jeff, I love that analogy. I'm going to steal that. I hope you don't mind to explain that to people. But I think, and I think it actually kind of illuminates for me why, like, getting these screens for our clients, it feels like in some ways, this is a little too strong of a way to say it, but like a necessary evil. Like it's a bridge. It's a bridge to get people interested now while we move towards, I completely agree with you, like a future where there's not an obsession with having it physical. But I think like to draw out your analogy, when we take photos on our phone, like many people do still choose a very small selection to get printed and framed and hung in their homes. Unless you're like me, I live with an artist and he doesn't permit photos in our home because he doesn't think that's up to par with the real art. But anyway, so I think people will still do that. They'll like, if they have a huge collection of NFTs, pick the small handful that they want on an infinite objects or on one screen that's rotating through a few, but it won't be the only way to collect or the de facto next step after you collect something.
I mean, I guess ultimately, if there's better, like if you have the ability to show something in AR on a wall in your house, you might, you know, there was better ways and easier ways to display it. Or ultimately, if we have metaverse realities, obviously the ability to display your digital art in a metaverse setting is infinitely easier with almost unlimited amounts of space, which would be potentially beneficial to our space as well as the PACE collaborative stuff.
Right, totally. Or so it spins off in different directions instead of like a one-to-one of I bought an NFT and I want it in my home. It's I bought an NFT and maybe I want to display it in a metaverse space. And maybe now I've honed my eye for looking at art and I want to collect some physical art to display in my home, which I think we're definitely seeing that come out of this new collecting community, which is pretty exciting.
I mean, I would say that's definitely starting to happen with me where, you know, I don't have a huge amount of room in my house, but obviously in a digital setting, I have unlimited space. And so whether it's on Cyber or Deca or stuff like that, where I can display my art and have people see it, but it is getting me more interested in traditional art as well. So I do think that's going to happen.
Yeah. And we have, where I've seen it start to percolate is collectors getting interested in the same artists who they've purchased NFTs from, but in their related work. So Loie Hollowell, as we've said, her NFT project with Art Blocks Pace was based on the series of paintings she did. So I've had many collectors inquire and ask to be added to that long wait list for a Loewy painting. Or something I'm very excited about this week is we have our Robert Whitman release tomorrow, and Robert has a series of prints that he did predating the NFT series, but that are also imagined celestial bodies, just like what he's releasing tomorrow. They're beautiful and actually quite affordable works. I actually personally acquired one, and we're making those available to our community, to our Art Blocks Pace community, because people are getting interested in Robert's work, so it's sort of a natural next step that you might want a related physical thing to live with.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I guess I'll speak for myself, but I imagine there's some other generative collectors that have only sort of surfaced in the last 1.5 to 2 years that all go to like a museum now, like MoMA or something, for example, and I'll see like a Delaunay or a Rothko or any of these artists that were around, many years ago, and my reference point will be a generative artist that's created something that reminds me of that. And that's really interesting to think about, like sort of in reverse, Ariel, which is probably not the case for most of the collectors from Pace, for example, right? How it's the other way around, and I'll be really curious to see over the next couple of decades, sort of that relationship and how it evolves.
I love that. And I have to tell everybody here, Alex, I'm going to out you. Alex and I walked through the gallery together last week, and this guy is becoming quite a connoisseur and had some really insightful things to say about art. And in fact, like being maybe a little newer to close looking at physical art and coming at it through that generative art lens, like you just said, Alex, I think is leading to you and other people like you having like a more rich relationship with art than a lot of people who can end up like having a superficial relationship with art and sort of only knowing it by names of artists or market results. And I like love the new interest we're getting from collectors from this space. I'm finding them to be some of the like most engaged and inquisitive and curious art viewers that I've met in a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a fun lens to like look at art historically through. So my background is in fine art. I'm a painter by trade. I had to, went through a traditional MFA program and your normal art history courses and that sort of thing. Generative computer-based art and generative art came much later kind of in my career. But over the holidays, I was in Chicago. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and my wife Kelly and I, hi Kelly, we were going through the museum, and they have this wonderful series of Monet paintings, Monet's Haystacks, and it's kind of like the same scene or very similar scenes, painted at different times of day, different times of year, different seasons, and they're all basically called like, I don't remember exactly, but haystacks, parentheses, daylight, comma, or, early morning, comma, winter, something like that to that effect. And so my wife just is like, like joking, we were joking, is like, well, it's kind of like features, right? So we have this series of, Monet paintings, and they have like feature sets that, are determining like what, the different points in the algorithmic space that we're being explored. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting way, to work that's out there that's done in a serial fashion, or artists who work in kind of a tighter kind of creative space over their careers. Like, it's interesting to kind of look at it that way and start to see like what the variables are, inside of their creative process.
Matt, have you or Vaughn had a similar? I mean, Matt, I think your relationship with art predates like NFTs and generative art in your collection there, but I wonder like just sort of how you think about that.
I think it's interesting. Like, I think the key like kind of overarching theme here is that like different things are going to resonate for different people. Like for me, like I came at it from a very different lens. Like, I started out in photography. Like that was kind of my first entry point into art, like when I was very young. And that was kind of my first entry point. And so like for me, like a lot of digitally native photography like simply doesn't resonate with me. I mean, just because like I think a big component of that is having a physical print to go with it. Like, just because I learned like that whole process of being in the dark room and like having an appreciation for that, like is kind of like completes the work for me, like having that physical component. Um, but like obviously I've also learned to never get stuck in one way of thinking. You learn that very quickly in this space. But I think like when you look at it from the lens of, you know, people that just collect physical works, physical art, like early on when I started collecting in this space, the number one thing was like it just doesn't like resonate with them being on a screen. So I think that's like the one thing we really need to figure out is like how can we make these works physically resonate with other people. And they're also like, you know, closed off to what we're doing, but it's also you know, you point to people like you, like where they wouldn't be interested in physical art that these people have already been collecting if it wasn't for generative art. So like it's mutually beneficial for both parties to be, you know, supportive of one another, but there's just needs to, we just have to find ways to get it to resonate with them. And typically I think that's going to be done through a physical medium.
Ariel, is it fair to say that generative art is the movement of today, even despite the fact that it's been around for, you know, I guess what, 70 years at this point, maybe a bit longer?
I really, truly believe that it is. I truly believe that it is. I think it is the thing that when we look back on what was percolating in the early 20s, if we can say that, and then gave rise to a much broader, you know, mass appreciated movement, it's generative art for sure. And going back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, I think the way that's going to happen, the way generative art really becomes a bigger and more widely appreciated movement and not just like a little jewel box that only the insiders know about, is opening the doors on two sides, opening the doors to new artists coming in, even artists who can't code themselves, and opening the doors to new collectors, which I know we all want that. Everyone says we want that, but I think putting our money where our mouth is and actually making things accessible to new collectors through things like fiat payments, things like you know, simplifying mechanics for purchasing, as we've been saying for the last few minutes, making physicals available. That's where generative art is going to really get to be as appreciated and you know, well known as I think it can and should be. If we say like generative art is this thing that can only be done by coders, it can only be appreciated by people who sort of deeply understand the origins and are fully like native and ramped up on everything Web3, then generative art will be appreciated by the, you know, relatively small group of people that are here right now, and we'll all love it and appreciate it, but it just won't be able to have its bigger moment. So I really hope we're in the former case, not
I'm
the latter.
curious, sorry, real quick. I know Vaughn has a question, but it kind of ties into what you just said, Ariel. Do you look at like generative art as a subset of contemporary art, or do you see it as its own movement? If so, we need to come up with a cool name for this movement.
Ooh, I like that. I mean, oh, it's so interesting. Like, what do I really think, and what do I think would be the best answer for all of us? I mean, contemporary art is a pretty broad term. It basically just means art that's being made right now. So in that way, of course, it's part of contemporary art. And in some ways, I think it's good for it to be lumped in with mediums that are more familiar to a wider group of people. But I also like the challenge of coming up with a new name for this that's not contemporary and not just generative either.
Well, I will say this now. I did not come up with this name. The first time I heard this was DC Investor. So I want to shout out to DC Investor if this ends up being the name. But he used a term possibly for the movement. He called it generativism. And again, I don't know if that's something that would ever catch on, but that was his name for a movement. I guess
I love it.
a question that we were kind of discussing amongst ourselves is before we threw it out, that was kind of in the process with a creative coder. You know, how important is the creative coder to the process? Is it 50%? Is it more than 50%? Is it 10%? Like, you know, how important is the coder? Is the coder literally just someone who's executing instructions and then in that sense not very important, or is their job significantly more important, and in some ways does some of their ability show through as well in the process?
Well, I'll take a stab at that a little bit. So I think it's variable, right? I think it's a spectrum of everything you described. It can be any of those things. So it can be it could be literally a 50-50 collaboration where both parties are equally contributing to the end result, sort of end artistic result. And in that case, I think it would be a named collaboration. You would have both people, listed as artists in that sort of situation. And then it can scale down from there, and it can be any amount of contribution, to the project. And it just, I think it all really depends on just how the team of individuals that are working on a project in that manner are sort of organizing themselves and where it's coming from. So I don't think there's a defined answer to that. I think it's really a case by case basis.
Totally agree with what Jeff said. I think also it will change over time as there are more generative coders. So artists have a wider range of selection of people to work with, and as traditional physical artists are just more comfortable with and fluent in the range of things that are possible using generative tools. So as the generative movement takes hold, for example, if I think of, let's say somebody who was working with a photography assistant in the early days of photography, where maybe there was a sort of director who's framing the photo and knows what they want, they're calling the shots, but there's somebody who's technically moving around the camera and the lens, the flash, all of these things. Early days of photography, when the director doesn't really know what's possible in the medium, that technical partner is going to have a lot of say, because they're going to be saying, you could do this, you could do that. If you think of now someone trying to direct in that way, the technical partner won't have to lean in those ways, because the tool is so much more familiar that the director knows exactly the bounds of what's possible and can really just direct to get what they want. So I think it's possible that over time, the role of the creative coder becomes more truly interchangeable and just purely execution.
I mean, that is what I kind of expected to hear. And I think that it kind of goes back to what Jeff was saying. When you bring your print job to a printer, you don't give them credit for the art. But I do think that there's a little bit more that goes on. Like I said, I mean, I have worked with some, I don't necessarily have a lot of artistic ability. So if I wanted something created, I have to get someone. And oftentimes, you can hire a bunch of artists to do something, and you're going to get different calibers of work from all of them. So I think the creative coder plays, a little bit bigger role than just an executioner, because you are going to get some of their vision in it. But yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's more a tool right now than anything else.
And I think there's room to just whatever sort of, whatever the spectrum is, or the proportion of contributions to a project, however you would measure that, I don't know. But, whatever that sorts out to be, I do think there's room for crediting, people. I don't think we don't need situations where, everybody else is a silent contributor to this project, and then there's just one person at the top, And so I also think there's plenty of room to acknowledge, where it's appropriate, probably based on the level of contribution to the project that who's contributed to this project. I think that's appropriate. And I think of movie credits at the end of a movie, right? One person couldn't have made this whole movie by themselves. And so there's all these people that are involved, and there's a big trailer of the order of how all their names come out and what size their names are, and that you're getting attribution for the work you did towards the project. So I think that's appropriate as well.
100% agree, and we always do that for our projects on ArtBlocks and elsewhere where we work with other types of technical partners. Credit is always given.
All right, I've got a question for everybody on stage, so you got to think about this pretty astutely. If you had to combine one conceptual artist, dead or alive, with a current generative artists of today, what would your dream collaboration look like? And I guess, Jeff, maybe I'll throw it to you first. And as I imagine you've thought about this before.
Geez, I don't know. I don't know about the artist, or the generative artist side. I would love to see like Solowit brought to life in this current moment. Huge fan of his work, and so I just think it fits so naturally. I don't know who I would pair that person with, so I'll punt on that one. But definitely Solowit, I think, would be an amazing, amazing artist's career to explore, kind of in this space in this moment.
Got to be you and Joseph Albers, right, Jeff? Come on.
I mean,
I was thinking that too.
I would do that in a heartbeat. Yeah, like go do a residency at the Albers Foundation and just do a bunch of research, and then
Oh my
do
God,
that in a
yes.
second. That'd be amazing.
I mean, like we could use someone from Pace's back from the Pace Galley. We'll use Mark Rothko and Tyler Hobbs for the collab of all collabs.
I love it. That would be quite a mashup. One who does like very simple, large shapes, and one who does very intricate, and intricate shapes. So that would be very interesting. I was going to say Rothko too. So you took mine, but I'll say Jeff has me with his Monet analogy from Kelly, which I think is very astute. Has me thinking about other artists whose work was really like one motif in many variations, and what could have happened if they had tools to explore hundreds of variations all at once. And another one that comes to mind is Calder. And if you picture Calder's mobiles, which so often were variations on a theme, I would love to see that. Although it'd be interesting to see how you translate the weight of the mobile and like the beauty of the weight into the digital. And I don't know who I would pair him with. I mean, I'll think about it and come back to me again at the end.
This is like, now I'm like, I can't settle on two artists. Like there's so many ideas I'm now spinning up in my head. I'm going to have to do like a tweet thread or something of traditional artists and generative artists and like pairing them together. So it's like a fun thought exploration. But one that I would be kind of curious to explore further is Ansel Adams, like, awesome landscape photographer, like super inspirational for me. And kind of Matt Delorier, because that charcoal meridian, like just brings me back to his work. And so like to kind of further explore how someone who focuses on natural landscapes can kind of bring that natural beauty into a more digital, analog medium would be kind of cool to see.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm going to go with Manolo and Picasso, which I'm not sure they would necessarily make the best match, but I've always been sort of astounded by their use of color, even though their styles are naturally completely different. I think like personality-wise too, they both like seem sort of, like they're sort of like by themselves, and like they really it's just like sort of them and their art and the process, and that's it. So I'm not even sure if they would be able to collaborate. They probably would just both refuse, but it's interesting to think about.
I love the Twitter thread idea. Let's do that. I think we should have double points to anybody who puts a woman in the pair, and quadruple points if they both women in the pair. And I'll say one more that will get me double points, which is Tyler has told us that one of his favorite artists and inspirations to him is Agnes Martin, who we do represent here at Pace. And if you don't know Agnes Martin's work, check it out. It's really beautiful, subtle, often stripes of like very, very light hues of white and pink. So just this incredible subtlety. You often see her pencil line kind of coming through the paint. And I think the two of them could like really do something incredible.
Sweet. I think maybe we'll do one or possibly two audience questions, and maybe we'll wrap it up. So if you have any that you want to ask the folks on stage, maybe just request to come on and ask.
I was going to say now would be a great time to revisit that allow list discussion we had last week for a potential Agnes Martin, Tyler Hobbs collab. I'm kidding.
Allow lists are banned. No more. All right, I'm just getting a couple of folks up on stage to ask a question. Bear with us for a second.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Do you have a question?
Yes, I sort of. I mean, I saw the title for the space, Conceptual Artists and Creative Coders, and I had tweeted this morning that as a fiber artist and someone who works in the traditional space and who is trying to translate a very specific piece of work for this space and having an enormous amount of fun doing it, I had actually tweeted out this morning that I am looking for people to collaborate with, which, I don't want to waste anyone's time here asking this question or putting this out there if, specifically this space is to explore, the artistic sort of aspects. But I just wanted to, or I would like to just say that as someone who's working in the traditional art field in a way that is really difficult to translate into digital work, but I know it's possible, and I'm looking for people to collaborate with who are expansive and inspired and can look at something and maybe just go, oh my God, I would like to do this with this. So I am here to say, I'm really looking for people to be creative and collaborative with in this way. So I've actually, I followed you guys on the stage, and I've made some notes and this, that, and the other, and I'm just here to. What can I say? Just to say that I'm looking for people to work with. So not really a question, and I don't, like I say, I don't want to waste your time, but I just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that.
We are too, like I said, so reach out to me too.
I will. I
Yeah.
followed you. Your DMs aren't on, but I would love to maybe email you and send you some things and just see if if it inspires. Great. Yeah, because I've got these pieces that I want to bring to this world. I love them.
Well, I think we're looking for the same thing as you, Bryony. We're also looking for creative coders, for case artists.
Okay, good. Well, listen, I'll be in touch.
And you mentioned fiber art, and I guess
Yes.
I don't know exactly, the type of work you're engaged in, but I will say that I know for many generative artists, the concept of weaving is it's kind of an algorithmic sort of process. And so I know for art, in art blocks in particular, there are a couple projects that are inspired by different artists that are engaged with weaving. I would point you to one called Perpetua by Punch Card Collective. You can look that up on artblocks.io. But so a generative project that's inspired by weaving, and they're actually working in the opposite direction now and creating prototypes of what it looks like to.
They're going backwards. Nice.
Yes, and how do you? Yeah, so using automated weaving machines and feeding instructions to create generative fabrics and things of that nature. So anyway, that'd be interesting for you to look at.
You said you cut out a little bit, Jeff, for me, but you said it was Perpetua and Punch Clock. Did you say?
Punch Card Collective is the artist group that worked on that project.
Okay.
But if you look up Perpetua, if you search Perpetua on Art Blocks, that project will come up.
I'll come across them. Fantastic. That's really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that. Any more questions? We'll take one more before we wrap up.
Okay, while we're waiting,
Yeah, hi.
Robert Whitman tomorrow. If you got excited hearing about a traditional artist working with a generative coder, we have an artist who has been working since the 1950s at the intersection of art and technology. He's in his 80s, sort of a seminal American artist, and he has an Art Blocks release tomorrow at noon Eastern, and you can check it out on the PACE website and the Art Blocks website.
Cool.
Perfect. Thanks, Ariel.
Hi, do you mind if I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah, so I was, as you were thinking about this this collaboration, I've been playing around with various sort of AI art and making. And first of all, I was wondering with whether there's been some sort of collaboration with the prompts in AI art, and then whether some of the generative art can be referenced and sort of played with and tied back to some of the more traditional styles. And so I wonder whether there have already been some interesting exploration in this area.
I can just say quickly, I was just thinking this morning about that story that I shared at the beginning of the call about how in early 2021, Pace artists started reaching out to me and to Mark, our CEO, saying, I want to do an NFT. Can you support me in that? And I was thinking, I wonder when those calls are going to start coming about AI art. And I think they haven't yet, but it can't be long. Technically, to answer your question, I'm curious to hear Jeff's perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess so. I'm as a executive at Art Blocks, we pursue generative art in a somewhat narrow fashion. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but we limit the amount of dependency that projects on Art Blocks need. And we do that so that they can be reproducible over time with limited, external needs. And so we're trying to write the entire projects on chain, onto the Ethereum blockchain. But that's just a direction that we've charted that's important to us. So our projects tend to be pretty efficient and lean, speaking data-wise, so that they can exist on chain. And AI art is completely in the opposite direction. I don't mean that like artistically. I just mean in terms of like data use. The more data, the better for an AI model generally. And so it's just not something that we're just engaged with at the moment on the way we are currently structured at Art Blocks. But I think there's a lot of value, and I just think it's really interesting. I find AI projects more interesting when the artist themselves trains the data set, so that the artist is choosing what the sort of like the machine learning data set is for the project that they're working on, because then instead of giving direction through text prompts, they're giving it through sort of by collecting the right sets of inputs to draw from to create new AI generated outputs.
Are you seeing any, like, and the other thing that I've been hearing about is sort of the idea of like using AI for coding. So like imagine the idea of basically coding an algorithm for a generative art using AI, right, with different prompts, and then thinking about how you could sort of make it random at two levels, like one, the inputs into the AI, and two, the sort of generative output that comes out of that algorithm. So yeah, pretty cool potential combinations, right?
Yeah, and I think I've actually, to be honest, like I've poked around at Chat GPT for coding reasons. Like I was just trying to see what it could do. Like, hey, draw me a grid of circles in in P5.js, and it spit out some code, and it does provide like an interesting building blocks. And I think that will be an interesting development, I think, unto itself, where what happens when creating generative art becomes a no-code process. I mean, it will someday, right? It'll be more of you'll have a visual interface or a plug and play kind of interface, and you'll be able to create generative art, without having to understand code. I mean, that will happen. That's, think of HTML on websites. That's kind of what it is now. People, there are people that know how to go under the hood and write, design a website with HTML, and it's good to have that knowledge, but you can also do it without that. So that'll be interesting too when we get to the point where all of these tools become sort of like no code tools.
All right, we'll do a last question. Stephen, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for having me. My question is about, this might be a little off topic, but custodial for institutions. That seems like the biggest kind of drawback that they have is how do we handle these NFTs? How do we custody them? I was curious if you guys had any kind of opinion on what the best, safest approach is. Obviously, in this space, it could get pretty nasty in terms of securing your assets. And the question that I've had a lot with speaking with people who are, high up in these institutions is like, how do we handle these assets? I was curious if you guys had an opinion on that.
I mean, I would just say look at some of the bigger DAOs like Flamingo and other people that are managing large amounts of these assets. It seems like Genosis Safe with multi-sig, obviously with a multi-sig wallet, seem to be the way that's being done. But yeah, I mean, this is a big problem that currently there is no good, viable third-party custodial solution for a lot of these assets, and it definitely is a problem. But it also speaks to how early we are still. The fact that there's no good institutional storage that anyone that I know of is really feels super comfortable with as of right now. I mean, that's definitely a big problem for the space. So yeah, I certainly don't have the answer to that.
All right, yeah, I was, just because that's a common kind of theme that I've been getting is like, wow, this is beautiful. We would love to have something of this caliber, and support this, but it's too risky. And I've been ideating and trying to come up with solutions of best or even innovation ways to create things that will make people safe one day, even if it takes years to happen. I just feel like that's what is really like the next step in terms of onboarding people on a faster level.
Yeah, I mean, before the space can really move forward on the level we need to move forward on, there's going to need to be viable institutional solutions because that's where a lot of the capital will come from that will drive the space, to the next level. So I think it's a matter of time. A little bit of the setback in the crypto world over the last 12 months certainly hasn't helped, but I think that everyone's still trying to move the ball forward, and I think you will start seeing better institutional solutions. I know that as of right now, I don't think there's anything really better than Genosis Safe with multi-sig wallet, multiple multi-sigs, multiple signers. I mean,
Great, thank you.
I think we're going to be wrapping the episode up right now. I don't know if my co-hosts can hear me right now.
Yes, we can, or at least I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank our speakers, Ariel and Jeff, for joining us. Obviously, thank my co-hosts for also being here. And our next episode is something I think people are going to really be looking forward to. I think it's tentatively scheduled for February 6th, but we expect to have Snowfro from Art Blocks on, and I think that'll be something that people really want to hear. We're going to be talking about some of the I don't know. I'm not sure if we're going to tease what we're going to be talking about, but I would say you guys want to tune in for this.
Yeah, I think G Money will also be joining, so it'll be interesting to kind of get his perspective. I know he's worked closely with Snowfro on the 9DCC project, and he's also just a very large figurehead in this space as well, and may not be as deep in the generative as us, but also will provide a unique perspective. So super excited for those two guests.
For sure. Okay, thanks everybody for joining today. We'll see you in a week or so.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in as well. See ya.